Hello and welcome. I am coming to you from a slightly unusual location tonight with my Totoros in the background to say hi, and with a special guest, Brittany Deaton. This is video number 3 of the LAMBDA series, and I'm going to be quizzing Brittany about specifically about some LAMBDAs she's written for the XL esports competition, and then just more generally about kind of how to use them. But I feel like we've been talking a lot about, prep lambdas, and I've been promising to share mine, which I will, but, I want to lay the groundwork for that first. But I thought that since I could persuade somebody else to share theirs with me as well, that we'd start with that. So, Brittany, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to chat about what I've written. We've talked about it a little bit. I think that I've got a relatively simple set here, but it's a great starting point for anybody who's interested in diving in, and would love to kind of talk through my process for how I got started, because this was really the first time that I had gotten into using lambdas, and so I was very much a testing ground for myself in learning that with this. So excited to share.
Nice. So that's the first thing I was going to ask you was when when did you start and how did you start using lambdas? What got you going?
Probably seeing some of the other competitors use it. I think I've been maybe not a late adopter to some of the newer formulas, but definitely I'm not first on the field with a lot of it, but want to make sure that I'm catching up. So as I start to see people use different things for the esports, I try to catch up. And so lambdas was one of the things that I didn't think I could push off anymore. Didn't feel necessarily super comfortable writing one from scratch in competition, but did get this sense and had heard some things about building out these lambda files. So I thought, hey, I'll give that a try. There's a lot of things that I do on repeat. So I feel like I can build myself up a set, and even if I don't end up using them directly in competition, can hone my skills for writing formulas. Maybe have some things that are stock and handy, and learn something new along the way. So it was very much a learning experience for me. Um, and I think I got started just maybe watched a couple of videos or looked up a few things. Obviously, have familiarity with a variety of Excel formulas and functions, and so it's kind of easy to adopt from that. But just kind of jumped in and started building some stuff, and the file that I share is really the place that I did that testing, and cleaned it up and kind of organized it along the way. So that really was my very first one.
Love it. Well, look, you're very on message for the series because I heard the word easy in there multiple times and gentle start, and that's the sell I'm trying to make here. There are lots of crazy lambdas out there, but the easy ones are also very useful. I definitely don't think you can call yourself a late adopter because I'm pretty sure there's like, I don't know, I want to say well over half the field who just don't use lambdas at all. And even of those who do sometimes use them, there's a lot that definitely don't have anything prepared. I think
Yeah.
you're not quite like cutting edge, but
I'm probably my own
you're
worst critic about a lot of this stuff. But yeah, not late, not last, not first, but hopefully in that sort of fast follower, maybe that fast follower type of
well, I like that. I like
category.
that. Alrighty. Do you want to where are my words? Do you want to share your screen and we can take a look at some of them?
Yes, I think it says I have it disabled, or that host disabled participant
Oh,
screen sharing. So I guess you're not going to allow
uh,
me.
interesting. Multiple. No, that's not. Oh boy, I gotta do. Oh, hang on. Yes, who can share? All participants. Who can start sharing when someone else is all participants? Okay. Uh, hooray!
Think maybe I got it if I got the right screen.
Yep, I can see
It's
it.
the standard. Are you seeing it now? Is it the right screen? Do you see my Excel file?
Wait a minute, you're on mute.
Yes. Oh, love it, love it. Bingo.
So I gotta say the very first one here, I remember looking at this as like it might be my favorite of all your functions. It's like it's such a simple idea, but just this thing that it goes both ways. So like I guess just by way of background, why don't you explain what it is, what it's for, and then we can talk about the details.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, when I first got started with these, what I was looking for was some of those things I was doing on repeat. And I wanted some things that were a little bit easier to approach as well since I was learning this. So dice and cards were really the first couple of things that I built some things out for. So with the dice formula, and I'm really creative with my naming, just called it dice. And I knew I wanted to have something that converted my dice into numbers. And I had some standard formulas using the Unichar formula to convert things. I've done that. It's not too difficult to pull that together in a competition, but it is a few extra keystrokes. So I was like, okay, I can take that, I can translate that, and use that to turn the dice into numbers. And that's really what I did first. I don't have all the prior iterations of this file, but I did it very piecemeal. So I actually came in here, and the first thing I built was that conversion of dice to numbers. And then I
Mm-hmm.
started thinking through, okay, what else might I want to do with dice? Well, there are times too when I need to get the dice perhaps from the number. And so doing that two-way conversion, thought that those fit in very well. And so all this formula does is it just does two things. If I give it a dice, it will convert it to a number. And if I give it a number, it will turn into a dice. And I don't think I really wrote in any like error logic. So it'll probably do something really weird if I give it something, off target. But
Yep.
so not a perfect formula, but enough to sort of get the job done. I think this is one I actually have found useful in one of the competitions and pulled that in. A lot of stuff I'd built sort of after I saw it in competition, so may not have had a chance to use it live yet. But that's kind of the approach here is doing those two things. And kind of what we'll see as I walk through a lot of these other formulas too is I've set up my file. As I said, this was my learning ground. So I wanted to set it up in an organized way where I could still follow through it, where I could kind of have a common pattern for building these things out. So typically
Mm-hmm.
what I'd have over to the left is my working, I'd have some sample data maybe pulled in, usually the yellow is the input stuff. I would write my Lambda formula, and then I would go and put it in the name manager. And so what I'll see over to the right typically is the use of the formula. So I wrote myself the syntax. So in case, in competition, I blank on what was that thing? What did I call it? What
I,
order were
I've
my
I've done
inputs?
that. I've definitely done that.
Yeah, so for every one of these, I have the same thing where I've got the syntax in here, and I've got an example, so I can kind of test it out and see, okay, my formula works. I get the thing that I expect, and so usually I have some samples, or I could change some of this stuff and see how it plays out, and maybe have some notes to, again, remind myself of what the things do in case I blink in competition.
Yep, yep. So a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. I mean, one is just the thing that I love about this is just the 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 formula is slightly more complicated to handle, going in two directions. I mean, not super complicated, but just, you've got that test there to, if it's a number less than up to 6, then you know that it's number going to dice, and otherwise, it's dice going to number. Like, it makes the formula a tiny bit more complicated, and it makes the
Mhm.
usage so much more simple because you don't have to remember, oh, I've got this one formula to go in one direction, another formula to go. I just, it's simple, but I just loved it when I saw it. It was genius.
Yeah. At a certain
Um,
point, that gets to be too much. There's some ones I wrote later where it's got a few different functions or a few different options. So it can get complicated. I think because I built it piecemeal of, hey, I built it one step at a time and then layered more in, that's a little easier than I didn't sit down and write this thing from scratch going, hey, I'm going to do all these different conditions. I built one, and then I said, okay, now I need to have logic that says, hey, this is when to use this logic versus the other. And so that's when I started layering it. So that helps with the build too, because you're doing it one step at a time and sort of building that foundation and adding layers to it.
yeah, yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's the nice thing about these that you can start from some pretty simple building blocks, but you've got time to play around with them, so you can experiment and like stick a bit on or stick another bit on and see what helps.
Mhm.
The other thing I wanted to pick up on that you mentioned was just, and it's probably a sort of a contrast between, lambdas for esports versus the kind of lambdas you might write at work, is just like you mentioned that you don't really have any error checking in here because, in an esports context, if someone tells you, well, there's a bunch of input that are dice or that are numbers between 1 and 6, you can be 99.5% certain that there's not going to be 153 in there or something like that.
Mhm.
Compared to in the real world, obviously anything goes,
Yeah,
and
you need to dummy
something might
proof
have
things
come
more
out of a
in the
system
real world.
wrong, or there's spaces or characters or whatever. But
Mhm.
anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
which I wouldn't
that's
put it past some of the case writers to throw some of that in there. And so do have to be careful when using these and, do some visual checking, do some testing like that. That can't go away. I forget which one. There was something I had tried using in competition. I don't know if I messed up my syntax or something unexpected. It's probably an early version of one of these formulas. And so I've had that come up where I tried to use something, didn't quite work, changed course. Because of that after kind of looking and seeing, okay, something looks off and I don't have time to troubleshoot it right now. But
yep.
yeah, in real world, you have to dummy proof things, especially if it's something that you may not be the user of. So here I am the sole user. I can write this however I want, however the naming makes sense to me, however I tend to do things. But if I were to build something for broader use, I would want to make sure that there are those considerations of how will other people interpret it, maybe some more sophisticated naming, maybe how I split or add in different abilities to do different things in one formula would be different, because it needs to be a lot more logical for broader use.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. And it's something I'll be talking about later on in the series as well. Is like there's a bunch of interesting practices out there around like how do you document them or how do you,
Mhm.
give inline help or that kind of thing. Which obviously is only or 90% relevant when you're writing for others, because if you're writing for yourself, then it's a lot easier to be like, well, I know how this is going to work, or I am comfortable that I can just go and look at the formula myself in a way that if you're writing a Lambda for someone else, I mean, just like if you're, preparing a workbook for someone else or writing a VBA module for someone else,
Mhm.
the standard is always a little higher for how carefully packaged it's going to be and how documented and everything else.
Yes.
So,
Yes, and it's different when speed matters for the competition versus speed doesn't matter in the same way in real life. So,
yep, yep. And when there's an example that you can do to check if you've got your calculations right,
yes.
that sure doesn't hurt.
Hmm.
So, eh, well, I want to ask you some other kind of general questions, but maybe before that, why don't you kind of give us a tour of some of the other stuff you've got going on here?
Yeah, sure thing. So, as I mentioned, kind of dice and cards were the first things that I addressed. The cards really has a lot going on. I've listed out the different conditions, the different things that it can pull back. So, I can do things like identifying what the suit is, what the name of the suit is, what the color of the card. There's been some stuff in the past where I need to know the color. There's been some stuff in the past where you need to know what the other suit is in that same color, which is a pretty unique situation, but it's come up a few times, the number for the card. And I even did some playing around with assigning a point value to cards, because that's come up in a few different competitions, either through kind of a standard point value or something unique for that game. So this formula goes in and says, hey, feed me some cards. So
Hmm.
my sample here is the Ace of Hearts and Ten of Hearts. And so these, I've got this example showing what it returns. So it's got the card name, it's got the suit and the suit name and the color and the diamond because that's the other red suit. It's got
Hmm.
the card number associated with it where I've assigned kind of 14 to an ace. Sometimes aces are one, so it doesn't always work. I recognize that that's kind of a limitation of what I've set up so far. And
Hmm.
then it will leverage this points table to convert the card based on the name in the
Ah,
left
interesting.
column to the points. And that reminds me, this is actually, I think, I tried using in competition and it messed up because I forgot that it was an input. The points table was an input. And so when I'd copied it over, it kind of messed up. But
It's funny. I was just thinking because, well, we'll talk a little bit more about the
mhm,
trade-offs in a bit, but I was thinking as you were saying that you had something for card points, it was like, oh, but you can't configure that in the function. But oh, I see it now. You've got it set
another
up to
input.
give that as, and that's smart. I like that.
Yeah. So that's one
That's
of those
very neat.
optional. And this is the first time I had played around with some optional arguments. So I've got um, the return of the points table. So the return being, hey, which of these things? Otherwise, it will just default. Um,
Right.
and then it will default to
Oh,
the
cool. So you can
card
call it
name.
with not pointing at anything except the cards, like the Ace of Hearts and Ten of Hearts, and it will do.
Hmm.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And that's what I
And
actually
then you
built
can,
first. So again, this is like that layering on. So I built that first and I said, okay, I feel like there's more stuff about cards that I'd want. So then I layered on the others, but left that as the sort of the default and said, hey, may not want to do more than the suit, but the suit was a common one to pull out, suit and or card name and suit were the two.
hmm that makes sense. Well, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
So
Yeah,
that's
the
my, you know,
the optional arguments I feel like make it again just like having the the dice function that can go one way or the other way, like having a smaller number of functions that can be more flexible is seems like definitely a better way to go versus trying to remember the 85 different functions that you have.
yes, absolutely. So yeah, so that's my that cards one. I think this was probably one of my latest ads was the direction. So we had a case with I forget which one it had, if it had the arrows or it had um the directions, but I was like, hey, these are both fairly similar in my mind. And this one I haven't used a lot or played around with a lot, but what I'd set up was being able to convert between the arrows and the names, as well as getting to like a numerical direction of 1 through 8. So I could do some different math and logic on it. So it'd be
Hmm.
something kind of like a helper of some sort with additional things layered on. But again, similar setup as I guess it kind of combines a little bit of dice and that kind of goes both directions, and the card converter has multiple options for output. So I had 4 different things saying, hey, I could start with an arrow and I want a number or a direction, or I could start with a direction and want a number or an arrow. So it does some stuff with that. And this one's starting to get into where I have some more lengthy formulas, so I had to organize myself as
Yep.
best I could,
I
but
mean,
kind
look,
of.
you're using no offense to Lambda because it is the star of the series, but you are using my number one favorite function there, which is let. Love to see it.
Yes, I'm a big fan. Ever since I started using that, that's probably been one of my favorite things. And I've used that in a lot of places. I think it's an incredibly, incredibly powerful formula
Oh
with
yes,
a
and
lot of options. And
I will just say we're not this isn't tutorial evening, but if that formula looks intimidating, we will be talking about how to write lets as part of this series because it is the key to writing the best possible lambdas.
absolutely gives a lot more flexibility around it. And I think I've used it in a few other places, but yes, definitely is the star of that directions formula there.
So one question I've
Mhm.
noticed that all of the formulas you've shown so far, they can all take an array. And I'm just curious, is that something that you've sort of consciously aimed for, or is that just it kind of happened to work out with the way you wrote it? Because it is something I think about when I'm writing.
It was probably a little bit of both. I think some of the first ones I wrote, I wasn't necessarily focused on that, but as soon as I wrote it, that was one of the first things I tested, and then realized it did work. And at least for some of them, I think for certain formulas I've written, it doesn't work in the same way. Maybe some of the text stuff, I want to say it combines things or maybe concatenates in some places.
Hmm.
Um, so then it kind of gets rid of that. But I did recognize that I often will use the arrays, especially given how the cases are set up. Right, you've got multiple formulas. If you're trying to build something all on that first page, that case page, you want things that can take in the arrays and calculate everything all at once. So it was something that I was looking for, although I may have stumbled upon it when I sort of first built my initial lambdas.
Hmm. That makes sense. Makes sense.
But yes, does make it very powerful. And then as I was testing it, I of course built those into, wanting to test a variety of situations. If I, built this formula on directions, I was like, okay, I want to see the results for all 8 of the directions. So did go ahead and sort of build out on the test versus maybe something like the cards, just pulled back a couple of cards to test it and view it because I didn't want a 52 row thing. I wanted to keep this
Yep.
kind of simple to navigate.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure when it's, you've got 15 seconds to grab the lambdas you need and get any, time benefit you're going to from it, you need to have it be as clear and as simple
Hmm.
to understand right away as can be.
Yes. Yep, definitely key.
All right. So what are the text ones?
Yeah, so text is kind of a variety of things. Yeah, I think along with the cards and the dice, the text is kind of the next thing on my list because there ends up being a lot of different things in text, and did try to build a variety of items. So, in one thing, and it's originally started with yeah, I wanted to create a formula that split like split a cell with a bunch of letters into it into one letter per cell.
Hmm.
That's come up in a few cases, and I had a very pretty simple formula for using that before with the mid and the length. Of course, this got a lot more complicated as I layered in more stuff, but I wanted to go ahead and sort of put that into a Lambda and be able to use it. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, kind of like built off of that and said, okay, well, maybe something would come up where I want to be able to split and tell it kind of how many letters to take. So what are the length of my segments? And so kind of added that in. That made the logic a little bit more complicated. Had to do some division and checking for the dividing by zero arrows because that was throwing me off a bit. But got that to work, so it kind of splits it out based on what I input. It will change it into multiple segments there.
Very cool. I like
Um,
it.
got some count letters. Thought it might be important to be able to like look at a word and determine how many of a certain letter there were. So in this case, it's looking for the A. In this one, I think this is where I had seen my initial build, the array. It didn't. I don't think it output an array. I think I had done some concatenation, and so it didn't output exactly what I was expecting. And so I did reconfigure that one a little bit because I did want it to be unique by each cell. And so
Mm-hmm.
this one is looking for whatever letter I input, and then across the words. And I did note, and that's why I wrote. I wrote this note. It's like it's case sensitive. So in this case, it's looking for the lowercase a, and the uppercase a is not getting counted. So I wanted to make sure I remembered that because that could, of course, cause a
Yep.
problem if I'm not expecting it. Um,
Yep.
and then I hadn't really built it with the anticipation of counting for numbers, but I thought, hey, I'll just give that a try. And the way I had written it worked. So lucky me. And I
Yep.
was like, okay, now it's multi-purpose and it can work with numbers too.
I mean, it's again like the more ground you can cover with just a few functions, the better.
Hmm.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And then the last one that came up is just in general. I think I'd been playing around with some like being able to reverse sequences, and I don't know if it ended up coming up in that as I was practicing that Othello case that I think you are the case author for. I want to say like for
You're
some
welcome.
reason it was part of that. That's like okay, I think I need the ability to do some reversing, and so I was playing around with that and built out one that would just reverse the text. Don't think that one's come up yet, but that was the idea of having something handy that could handle that.
I will say, just not that this has ever tripped me up on a case, but I have seen this come up a couple of times. Uh, Watch out if you use that with emojis,
Mm,
because there's this weird thing. Not everyone, but like most of the weirder emojis, like I think anything that's not an ASCII character, maybe, or something like that,
okay.
they they're a weird mix between like one character and two. They're like two characters put
Like
together.
dominoes do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Dominoes are
So
weird.
if
I haven't
so
done
if
anything
you
with dominoes yet.
so if
That
you
needs to be on my
take
list.
like the left character, like the left one,
Hmm.
it will take the whole thing. But if you take mid one, it'll only take the first half of it, which is this weird character that doesn't render by itself. So, but what it'll do is it'll swap the order of the two halves of the emoji and break, and it's really weird.
Yeah,
Which,
that
I mean,
wouldn't be
it
ideal.
it would take some definite cruelty for someone to set a case that required you to reverse a string, including emojis, while allowing for that.
Don't get any ideas, anybody watching this. This might be authoring cases.
I mean, cruelty, I feel like, is not an infrequent motivator for case authors.
Yeah, some of them are kind of rough. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, we're looking at you, your simple case.
Yeah, I was glad I did not wake up in the middle of the night to do that last one after I heard about it after the fact. I'm like, nope, glad I got my sleep.
Yeah, yeah, you probably made the right decision there. But anyway,
Yeah.
it's
So yeah,
all good fun.
obviously, and I mean, as we mentioned before, it's like some of those nuances these might break, but the benefit of having built these lambdas on my own means that I should have a better understanding of how they work and what to expect when they come out. So that might be something too. It's like might have the lambda, might be getting me part of the way there, but may not be something that works for a particular case, and I might have to, in the context of esports, abandon it, or more in the context of real world, then of course,
Yep,
adjusting and refining to account for some more situations.
yep, makes sense. Makes sense. So what are the cell info? What have you got?
Yeah, so this is another of the more recent additions. Realized I was not always super quick at being able to translate between cell references and names into the things that I needed. There were some things that I would do fairly commonly, but felt like a lot of steps and a lot of clicks in the heat of trying to do the battle. So I wanted some things that would kind of just turn this into numeric again, kind of in something I could do some logic and formulas on. So really just does three things based on a cell reference. So it can output me the column and row numbers. It can output me just the column or output me just the row, all in one formula. And so it's doing some fairly simple things, but it's just leveraging the indirect formulas and then pulling back those column and row numbers so that I can do more math on them, where you
Mm-hmm.
can't really do that with the letter as much.
Hmm. Cool.
So had added that in, and then this one, the permutations, was one that I did not actually initially write.
I recognize this.
Yes.
I
So
didn't write it either, to be clear.
yeah, and this is where I think it's an interesting lesson learned, because as opposed to the other lambdas, I don't feel as comfortable in understanding exactly how this would work, since I did not write it, did not go through the pain of testing and refining and working through and troubleshooting.
Hmm.
So it's not one that I'm quite as comfortable with. I did try to do some refining. I think there were some of the operators that I'm like, hey, I think I want the default to be the opposite. I think like the order matters and allow repeats. I kind of wanted it the opposite of the original one. And so I'd
Hmm.
done a little bit of refining, and I recognized through that it was a lot more difficult to do than refining some of my other formulas, in part because it's a more complex formula, but also in part because I'm not the one that wrote it. It's not in the same syntax I would normally use in some places, or the naming or the order, some things like that. So I think there's something to be
Yep.
said about writing your own formulas.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, even if it's like, writing your version of somebody else's thing, like, you can take all the inspiration, but you might find it easier to use, like you say, if you write
Mhm.
it in your style, you name things in your way, you whatever. I mean, this I haven't mentioned, but this is a formula that Bo Ridabon wrote, and Bo is a king of conciseness.
Yes.
And so it's like
Single
this
letters
this
everywhere.
this formula is like a line and a half long. It's not even the longest formula in this workbook, and it's like within that it's handling like six different functions all rolled together. It's kind of wild,
Mhm.
but it's super dense, and that's like it's incredibly impressive, but I can see that if you wanted, especially if you wanted to like use this, but maybe if you also wanted to be able to edit this on the fly because you wanted a slightly different, use case or whatever, then you would feel much more comfortable if it was, if you had rewritten it in your own way. And like you said, if you
Mhm.
write it in such a way that the defaults go the way around that you expect them to.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree with that. So it was one that I had borrowed. He had shared it with the group, and so I pulled it in as something that I could use. I think I attempted to use it to brute force a problem in one competition and ran into a limitation that I had not. I tried to do way too many combinations of things. I was like, I just want to brute force. I can't figure out this formula. I just want to brute force it and try every combination, and
Yep.
it returned too many things, and so it actually broke. And I spent a little bit too long trying to troubleshoot that in competitions. That was kind of the downside to having
Yeah,
borrowed this, is I wasn't able to handle that and actually hit up against it.
it's definitely the trade-off, right? That like in most cases, you're writing these things in advance to save, anywhere between 5 seconds and a minute. And
Hmm.
so if using, something prepared in advance leads you even slightly off the track, then it's, you're going to use up way more time than you saved in trying to figure out what the heck just went wrong and blah, blah, blah. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think you definitely need a high degree of comfort with what you're going in with if you're going to use them to gain a competitive edge.
Yes, absolutely.
So one thing I'm kind of curious for your take on is how did you think about what to make into a formula? And so as an example, um, like say with the dice, for example, like you've written a formula that converts a dice to a number or a number to a dice. Now, lots of times dice are used for game boards. And so you could have written a function that said, I'm going to take a whole load of dice and turn them into, where am I after each number of rolls with a game board of a certain size and yada, yada, yada. And, you'd probably have a lot fewer use cases for it, but it would be, super helpful if you just happened to hit. How do you think about like the right level of complexity to get that kind of balance between something that you'll be able to use lots, but that will still be helpful enough?
Yeah, I think the approach that I took, and it probably is a little bit of a mirror of my approach to actually solving the cases, in competition, is I do tend to um, kind of do things in steps and pieces, in part because I want to be able to troubleshoot or adjust for those later cases. And so it's kind of the same thing here. If I wanted those kind of small pieces, things that I thought were multi-purpose and could be leveraged, things that I had seen myself doing a lot, like okay, across a variety of things, I am taking a dice and I just want to get the number, and I can use that in a lot of places. Um, and I find myself doing that a lot, and then I'm adding on more logic, perhaps something very specific to that case. Like you said, maybe it's in a game and I need to find a cumulative spot that people are at. So I probably took it the more sort of simplistic route of, hey, I want to do the simple things that I'm repeating a lot, knowing that I need to still write that more complex logic, but that gives me a set of things that is a lot more multi-purpose. And like you said, it's not just something that is going to apply if I hit a specific type of case. It's stuff that will apply to multiple ones. So I think it's kind of like I said, like that mirror of my game style as well, of having probably a lot more steps detailed out in simpler formulas, but piecewise, so that I can, like I said, build on it, so that I can troubleshoot, so that I can handle those later cases.
Yep.
And the converse is, of course, it takes more time to put one of those steps in there or keep things organized. So that's the trade-off that I make as it relates to the competition itself too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that ability to sort of break down what you're working on and to kind of say, okay, this piece is a common factor that keeps, that comes up in like all these different contexts that I'll keep using, but that is kind of as simple a version of that as possible. Like, I mean, I think it's obviously a useful skill in esports, but like for me, that's kind of one of the things where if you have that skill, then lambdas can be much more useful to you in work in real life, because
Hmm.
you can kind of break down, okay, so these are the sort of three pain points where they would save me the most time over a typical month or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm curious, a couple of things. One is, uh, did you sort of write these more or less all in one go, or are you kind of always tinkering, always adding? How did it kind of come about?
It's a little bit more of the tinkering and adding as I went. So, I think I sat down at one point and set, and maybe I worked through some of the dice, the cards, a little bit of the text, and that was kind of my initial set of saying, hey, I'm gonna kind of build a few things. And I think maybe the first time through, for the dice, maybe I only did the one argument of dice to numbers. For cards, maybe I only built out the card name and the suit, and then over time I said I want to add some more things. And so it was kind of, when I first got started, there was probably several weeks where I was in there tinkering pretty frequently, adding and sort of building up my initial set. And then it's been a lot of peaks and valleys. I see something new, then I'm like, okay, that would make a great addition to the Lambda file. Then I go in and add it. So like I said, the directions, the cell info, those were more recent adds from that. So the idea was for it to be kind of an evolving file. Built myself this, said, hey, I can either add, like with the text, I can have multiple formulas that are kind of all text related and kind of organize it that way. You can just add more rows, add more formulas in there, and then just kind of build it up over time.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way you have it kind of presented, and I'll be honest, my Lambda workbook is basically just a blank file that has a bunch of things in the name manager. And so if I go a while without using it, I have to be like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, I knew
So
that was going to be me. My life has been a little hectic, and so like I will go weeks at a time without doing anything, like looking at the stuff competition related. Like this today, like pulling this up and looking at it was probably the first time I'd done anything with it for. Say, I didn't participate in the last qualifying round, so the round before that. So I'm like, I'm going on 2 months now, probably without having that sort of esports focus, looking at Excel. Of course, I'm in Excel for work, but it's a little bit different of a view. And yeah, I knew I was going to need something to remember things. And you'll even see, like, I've got to remember these. Like, remembering things is an important piece for me. So like, I literally have some formula names. For some reason, I always forget. Large and small were probably the first things that I noticed. Like, I know there's a formula to get me the largest thing. What is that? And multiple times I have forgotten that. And then I know, like, some of these formulas too. I'm like, I know that they exist. I know how to use them. For some reason, I always forget what the name is. And it's really hard to even just do a quick search and remind myself of the syntax, or, get the Excel help. So I'm like, yeah, remembering things is an important piece for me. So I've got these, I've got,
I love it. I love it.
I've got like copies of symbols in here so I can just quickly grab something if I want to, copy it. I found myself doing in cases where I get like a unique list of something so I can have something like this, but this way it's just easy to grab and go versus building another formula to pull it in. So
Yep,
yeah,
makes
the
sense.
remembering things and having the syntax, having the notes, having the examples is important for me, because I just need probably that quick reminder of how does this thing work and make sure that I've got it right.
Yep. So the other thing I'm curious to ask you about, it sounds like you sort of the esports was your motivation and your kind of opportunity, so to speak, to kind of pick up lambdas. Have you found yourself adopting them in work as well, or is it just something you use for competitive Excel?
I think for me, it's just been something for competitive Excel. Honestly, I don't get to do a lot of real complex Excel stuff in my job anymore. I get to do more PowerPoint stuff. It's great. Um,
Moving
but
on up.
yeah, get to do the PowerPoints now. It's great. Getting the words right in the bullets. So I have not had an opportunity to really use the lambdas at work. Have used Let's some, and so maybe it's just a matter of time before something pops up, because the quirky little side Excel things come my way, and so it gives me a chance to play around with it and makes me happy in
You're
between the
you're
PowerPoint decks.
you're still known as the office go-to even as you become more senior.
Yes.
Love it. Love it. Um, I think that's all I had on my sort of question list. I don't know if you have any sort of closing words of wisdom to the aspiring Lambda learners out there.
Say just give it a try. I think it's a lot of fun getting into it. And maybe I haven't been able to apply these in esports or at work in quite the same ways I expected when I set out to build this file. But I think even just the process of trying out and building some things helped me to learn and understand it and just have another tool in my toolkit for later. So I'd say just dive in, give it a try. If it breaks, that's fine. You can troubleshoot and fix it. If you get something that's super helpful, then that's a win. So either way, just get in and try it.
Totally agree. Totally. I find myself saying this to people often, like whether it's about like Power Query or VBA or dynamic arrays or lambdas,
Mhm.
like the time you invest in learning to, you know, as Eric Ohm would say, in these micro automations and like these, making these like tiny little things go faster, even if you don't use that specific one, like building the muscle that lets you do that will mean that when you need it later, even if it's not when you have off the shelf, you can knock it together much more quickly. So yeah,
Yes.
I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, the analogy I always use is kind of that analogy of a toolkit. And so when I'm talking with people at work who are interested, like I had a talk with some interns, incoming interns, and I was like, hey, there's lots of ways to solve a problem in Excel, lots of ways to solve a problem in work in general. But the important thing with this is that you are picking those different skills and knowing what the options are and starting to learn what the pros and cons to those different things are. So, like we said, hey, with Lambdas, the error handling, if you build something in versus not, like, there are reasons to do that. There are reasons not to do that. And so it's by trying it out that you start to learn that. You get those things in your toolkit. And then when you need to pull it out later, you've at least got an idea. Even if you can't sit down and do it from scratch, okay, maybe I just need to Google search and remind myself, okay, how do I write that for Lambda? What's some of that syntax, or where are some examples? Just gives you that much more information to be able to get started.
Makes total sense. Well, Brittany, thank you for giving us a tour of your Lambda workbook, a little peek behind the curtain as top secret access. That's very cool. I'm like I said, I'm going to be sharing mine, and I've a couple of other people have volunteered to share theirs as well. So hopefully all the secrets will be out there before too
Yeah,
long.
and feel free to share mine as well. I am more than happy to get it out there and let someone learn from it or be interested by it or I don't know, critique it. Feel free to do that. I don't need your critiques, but you can do them in your head.
Constructive criticism.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we can